Welcome to Out of Home Insider, the loudest voice in out of home. Today's guest is Craig Andrew Cook. Craig is the co-founder of Mobilads, one of the fastest growing mobile advertising companies in the out of home industry. Find out how Craig came from investment banking to find an opportunity in out of home just a few months before COVID that has really changed the way advertisers are able to deploy mobile ad campaigns by way of wrapped vehicles. So if you're looking for more great companies like Mobilads, head over to onescreen.ai and learn more, where you can find more great companies like Mobilads that do things like wrapped cars or billboard advertising and the first free public access directory for all things out of home. So if you're looking to find more companies like that, head over to OneScreen and learn more. And without further ado, let's go.
Welcome, everybody, to the Out of Home Insider Show, a podcast like no other, hosted by the one and only Tim Rowe. Get ready to have some knowledge dropped on you and to be entertained, because nothing's more valuable than food for your brain. So sit back, relax, we're about to dive in as the best industry podcast is about to begin.
All right, Craig, thanks so much for being here, man. We've got like a lot of stuff to cover. You've got a lot of cool tech and a very cool story. So I'm really excited to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Absolutely. So a common place that we start with everybody is asking the question, how did you get into this crazy game of out of home? When we caught up last week in preparation for the episode, we started in this industry about the same time, like 2019. We're both pretty new to the business. How'd you get into this? Maybe let's just start there.
Yeah, sure. And I don't want to say it was by accident, but it definitely wasn't kind of calculated, right? So we started the company in 2019. I was actually working at a bank at the time. My partner Niels was working at another startup. He had also been in banking prior. So, we had no idea what out of home was. Of course, had always seen it, but couldn't put a term on it, right? And the basic idea was, as I had been in New York for the past, I guess, 5-6 years at the time, I had noticed me and my colleagues and my friends switching from taking taxis to taking rideshare vehicles. And I was in a cab that I had noticed before I got in, had an ad on top, on a Friday night. And Uber pulled up next to us and, didn't have an ad. So I started thinking, there was 15,000 taxis at the time, I think capped by the TLC in New York. There was kind of a free-for-all for hire vehicle permits, they call them, right? So Uber and Lyft drivers. So I think at the time there was probably 110, 120,000 of those.
Because in New York City, just for to folks that may not know and orient us here, in New York City, taxi and limousine? Right. They issue badges. You can only operate a taxi in New York if you are licensed by the Taxi and Limousine Commission, versus the democratization of rideshare, where anybody can just suddenly be a taxi or limousine.
Right.
Can you just paint some color around that? Like just how that works in New York?
Yeah. And I'm not, I know quite a bit, but certainly not an expert. So the way I understand it, the medallions are limited rights, which they've been that way for a long time to keep, the supply and demand dynamics kind of in order, right? So 15,000 or so medallions that are owned by these vehicle owners that then rent those cars to taxi drivers, right? So the actual driver of the taxi is just making a kind of a wage, and then the owner of the vehicle is getting more of the money. So Uber kind of flipped that model on its head. Everyone in New York would theoretically own their own vehicle and not be required to own a medallion, but they do have a similar process, which is just essentially like a permit. So you have to have a car that has a TLC license plate, and then you have to have a TLC license. So neither of those processes are easy, right? There is a cap on for-hire vehicles, but that cap at the time was 10 times higher than the cap on taxis.
Got it. Okay. So this was a way to kind of short circuit the system and get around that medallion system. So now we've got hundreds of thousands of vehicles to choose from. The traditional taxis, you saw one had an ad on top of it, and there's all these Uber cars and Lyft cars that don't have any ads on them, and you're thinking as the finance banking guy, hey, I should wrap these things and turn them into ad units.
Yeah, and it turns out it wasn't that simple, right? It wasn't just a numbers game. It wasn't just that there's 15,000 taxis. They, for the most part, you usually see an ad on top, right? They're booked out for the year. It wasn't that simple. So there ended up being rules that really weren't in place to stop us from doing it. But after we started, it turned out that the idea wasn't so, we're not the first people to think of this. And there was some stuff going on behind the scenes that were saying it's not illegal to do it, but if you start doing it at scale, we're going to have to either essentially take a cut, or you're going to have to go through some sort of process to get approved as a vendor. So for about a year, we operated in New York, wrapping cars. We did our first campaign ever in New York. It was a much smaller campaign. That's why when I say we did our first real deal, it was in Atlanta, Georgia, because this New York one was about, I think, 15 cars.
And you started this, just for the record, because you glanced over it at the beginning, 2019, 2020, and you do your first campaign when?
So it actually started. So the idea actually kind of began in 2018. And so I started, every time I took an Uber, I'd get the driver's info. I started building a list. I started figuring out, in New York, the model for Uber should be you bring your own car to work. It turns out that in New York, that's the only place it doesn't operate that way. So these guys were actually, there was companies that owned taxis or for-hire vehicles that started buying up or applying for these for-hire vehicle permits. So it kind of turned into the same model as the taxis, where none of the guys who were driving, or a large majority of them, actually didn't own their cars. So they were renting the cars from the same people who maybe used to own taxis or owned a bunch of black cars, which are called, for-hire vehicles. So anyway, I started going to the drivers, asking them, do you own your own car? Would you be willing to advertise on it? And then they basically pushed me to companies that own 2,000, 3,000 cars in the city, where I could actually, in my head, go to them and say, if I need to do a 2,000 car wrap, which would be the idea at the time, that I can just go to this one company who owns them all. They can kind of mandate the driver to take it, or they can give the driver a cut. So we started seeing a lot of kind of big ideas coming, where we could go and get 2,000 cars at one time through partnerships, which outside of New York is impossible. You have to go basically driver to driver because they own their own vehicle. There's no roll-up system to, call one person and get a list of 2,000 drivers, right? You have to go one by one by one. So yeah, that was the idea. And the reason why we went with wraps is because really, I didn't want to start this business by raising a bunch of money. I didn't want to go all in, not knowing if it would work or not. And so what I did was basically just start the most simple way, which is, if I can get someone to buy an ad, I'll figure out how to do a wrap. I'm not going to buy a bunch of taxi top boards and have to, get them back if the driver doesn't want to work for us anymore, something like that, right? So the basic idea was buy these wraps that you can put on, and then when the campaign's over, you take them right back off. You go back to having no cost, no overhead. Which worked pretty well until essentially the TLC came out and said no more wraps on for-hire vehicles. They started a process to basically make it a permitting system, and we quickly said, we don't really have the capital to play that game, and so we started going to other cities that basically had no rules. So really, anywhere outside New York at the time, it was a free for all. You could do whatever you wanted. So
and the challenge there would become that there weren't these big pools of single inventory owners. For sake of nomenclature, I suppose you would have to go driver by driver. You knew that the opportunity there was to circumvent this permitting system that was being enforced in New York, but that the challenge would be you had to find the drivers yourselves. Is that a fair summation of how the challenge would change?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think we looked at it two ways. It was one, we thought New York being the mecca of advertising, that, this is where we'd have the most demand. People would just piggyback on the Uber and Lyft thing and and kind of run with it. It turns out that the amount of inventory in the city, the amount of noise that's created by the billboards and everything else, it kind of muted our inventory a bit. At least that's the perception. And so if you really want to take over New York, maybe you have to do 2,000 cars, right? It's such a big city. I mean, we've done campaigns of 100 cars, and I see them quite frequently. But if you're doing 10, you might not ever see one, right? It's just too big of a city, and you can't really take over the market that way. So that wasn't the case in Atlanta, Georgia, where we did our first campaign. We did 150 cars for Boost Mobile. And as you mentioned, yeah, that was the first one. And really, we had no idea what we were doing. We got a printer. We printed out a bunch of ads. We threw them in a U-Haul. I drove overnight, basically quit my job on a Friday, I believe, and had to be in Atlanta on a Monday. Drove straight through the night. I actually ended up meeting my parents in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is where I'm from. So they kind of finished off the rest of the trip. I don't know, that 5 or 6 hours that was left in the journey. And we really, I arrived at 7 a.m. in Atlanta. I think it was a Monday, and we started wrapping cars at 8 a.m. And,
wow. That's a real,
got it going.
Burning the boats kind of story. That's people talk about burning the boats. That's burning the boats. That's burning the boats. Hey, I'm quitting, loading up a U-Haul full of 150 vehicle wraps, driving to Atlanta, and I'm going to go personally start putting these things on cars. Yeah, we're working with the people to put them on cars. Yeah. How did that all go down? How did you get 150 drivers in Atlanta? And what was the installation like? How did you find an installer? Was this you out there like putting them on? Like how did all that go down?
Yeah, actually at the time I had no idea how to wrap cars. I taught myself over the next 2 years basically just by watching and doing. I mean, I had thousands of opportunities to jump in and slap one on a car. So I taught myself over the next year and a half. Especially when money got tight, it was like, if I could jump in here and wrap one instead of paying these guys, we can hold on to that money. But actually at the time we found a couple of folks on, so I guess starting with the drivers. So we actually went from Ridgewood, Queens, which is where we were based at the time. We got a tiny little office with a printer in it. We left, I think, with 10 drivers signed up.
You left to go to Atlanta with only 10 drivers.
Yeah, we had 10 drivers.
I love this story.
We had 10 drivers, I think, kind of scattered across like 5 days. So in reality, that first day we had probably 2 people signed up to come in. We had no sort of system to communicate with them. We were doing all this on our personal cell phones, our personal iMessage, WhatsApp. And it turned out that Atlanta, and we know this now, is actually a really good market for this. There's a ton of rideshare drivers. It's a bit of a lower cost of living. So paying someone $250, $300 to wrap their car for 4 weeks actually helps their bottom line quite a bit. I mean, there was people that told us like, this will go, pay half my rent this month. Wow. So it was a kind of an easier sell. And I mean, these are still full-time, 40 hours plus Uber, Lyft drivers, right? But they just don't make as much money in Atlanta. And so it turned out to be, I guess in that sense, we got lucky that, maybe if they had sent us to Vegas or LA, it wouldn't have been as easy to go from 10 to 150. But in Atlanta, which has always been a good market for us, folks just started showing up. I think we started the week with 10 and we probably ended the week with 400 people signed up. And we actually were able to filter through and kind of pick, the better vehicle model, the black cars versus the red or something that might not look as good with the ad. So yeah, it was a wild start. And really, when we look back at it, it wasn't, it was one of those leaps of faith. We had the contract in hand. It just, I think Niels and I have always had the mentality of just like, we're going to go down there and we're going to be there and stay awake until it's done. And we actually had an installer that we found online through the 3M website that signed up pretty quickly. We offer them a decent amount per car. And since there's so many cars, they end up getting paid quite a bit of money for that, 4 or 5 day sprint.
Sure.
So we've never had an issue finding installers either. So, we got it done and the cars look good. The print came out correctly, which looking back, we didn't know what we were really doing there either, but the colors were fine. And that kind of got us started and onto the business. Right at that point, There was no real turning back. I had quit my job, and actually, I quit my job. I was working in investment banking. I quit my job 2 weeks before my bonus from the previous year, which a lot of people said was ridiculously
crazy,
stupid.
Craig. What are you doing? You're crazy. You got a good job. You're about to get paid, and you're gonna quit this to pack a U-Haul and go wrap cars.
Yeah, not a small amount of money either in investment banking. I mean, your bonus can be equal to your salary for the year, so it's
sure.
A lot of people said that was stupid, and I somewhat paid for it over the next 12 months when we were ramping up and we didn't pay ourselves a salary and stuff. But it worked out.
It worked out. You're here telling the story. That was 2019.
We're still here.
It's not been a terribly long time since then. How's the business changed and grown since then? Right. So you started out in New York, wasn't going to be a fit, found Atlanta was a great home. And you really carved out this niche of doing big campaigns, 100+ cars in these markets. Speed to market's kind of your claim to fame. I think that everyone's kind of astonished with how quickly you can deploy at scale. How has the business changed from you and Neil's like wrapping cars and texting drivers and all that? What's it look like today? And how are you working with brands across the country?
Yeah. So a lot has changed, and actually, we were able to take the COVID period where business was quite slow to work on our ops, knowing that hopefully one day it would bounce back. And so we've streamlined a lot of those issues. So there's two big things with the campaigns we launched in terms of drivers. It's communicating with them, so letting them know that the campaign's available, answering their questions, getting them to the location to get the car wrapped, and then there's payment. Right, payment is always top of mind with these guys. So we actually started by using Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. Super hard to track who had been paid, who hadn't, who Neil's paid, who I paid, who someone else helping us in the back end paid. And so what we did was we built a mobile app that solved both the communication issues and then the payment issues. So it's impossible to double pay someone. It's impossible to for them to kind of upload a photo of a car that's not theirs. If they sometimes they try stuff like that. Sometimes they want to take the wrap off a little bit early. It's a rare case, but it does happen, and we try and replace that vehicle. But we have eliminated the ability for them to do that because they won't get paid if they don't upload a photo versus taking a photo and sending it to us. So we made these systems and put them in place that really took a big workload off of us, but also made it made sure that all the cars are on the road on time and all the cars stay on the road for the time, and that they are driving the time that is required, right? So 40 hours a week is what we require. In terms of other things, so we quickly scaled after Atlanta, realizing that we might have more demand outside New York than in New York to, over the next really year and a half to 25 or so cities. So I think we've done campaigns at this point in 28, but we have drivers in, over 300 cities. So basically any major market in the US that, has rideshare, at the time rideshare or now delivery, food delivery, DoorDash, Postmates, Uber Eats, those guys, any city that has that we can operate in, and we can go kind of that Atlanta model. My rule is always, if we've got like 10% of the signups going in, we'll be fine by the launch date to get all the cars on the road. So
what do you attribute that to? Is there like a virality component to it? Is it drivers talking to other drivers? Like,
yeah,
you've certainly figured this out and got the math down. Like, what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I don't want to call it a trade secret. I don't think it's a secret to anyone. I mean, essentially, Niels and I just don't avoid that tough, hard work. So any new city that we go to, and once we go to a city once, we're good. At least from what we've seen, we're fine. But when we first go to a city, it used to be that both Niels and I would go, post up, shake every driver's hand, ask them for a referral, talk to them, The thing with drivers is that, you know, they don't necessarily trust us when we come into a market, but they trust each other. It's kind of it's a base, it's a family. Yeah. And so if we've got what we try and do, and maybe this is giving away some secrets, is we try and pinpoint those 10% that we start with. We find people who are influential in that city, in that community. So there's groups of people that communicate with each other in various ways, and they have leaders. And so if you wrap the leader's car and you pay them on time and you pay them up front, and then you pay them to refer someone else, and they get that money and it's in their bank account, they're happy to tell someone else to come do it. And it turns out they're mostly all happy to do it. It's not a small amount of money for them. So that's kind of where we start. So we find ambassadors.
It's a lot of hard work though. I think even if you release in the trade secret, like gets boots on the ground, like sure, if you want to go do the work too.
Yeah, that's why I say it's not really a secret. It's more a matter of, are you willing to do it? And I don't think a lot of people are. So obviously it's tougher to scale that way, but we see it as, like I said, once we go once, we're okay. So we're willing to go to every city once if we can get that city for the rest of the time, right? So that's awesome. That's been our approach. And really, you know, it wasn't that we were so happy and willing to do it. It was more so we didn't have the funding to do it any other way, right?
Any other way.
Niels and I were there, you know, ourselves in person in those, you know, crappy motels and stay in places way too long. Some places great to visit, some places not. But really,
what was your favorite place? What was the one place you visited that you were pleasantly surprised and you thought, you know what, I might come back here someday?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's see. I feel like Niels has just, for some reason, has been sent to like weirder. So not weird, but places you probably wouldn't go unless you were doing a campaign. So he went to Columbus, Ohio, which, you know, college town. So there's some good stuff there. Yeah. I mean, we did a campaign in Jackson Hole for DraftKings, which,
that's cool.
You know, it's not like I was there skiing and hanging out with the high end clientele, right? I was working the whole time, but that place was, I guess it's not a direct answer to your question, but in terms of being able to go somewhere, knowing that I was just going to be working and wrapping cars, being able to take in like the nature and the wildlife. There was no direct flight back from Jackson Hole to New York. So we ended up driving from Jackson Hole to Salt Lake City. And I think, at least in the US, like one of the most beautiful rides I've ever taken. It was amazing. So I also went to Morgantown and Charleston, West Virginia, which I didn't have the highest hopes for. It turns out that the economy, especially in Morgantown, because of the university, the economy is growing. The people are super friendly. And I went down there. I think we're going to be there for 3 days. I was really hoping to not be there for 3. We ended up being there for 4, and I wasn't that upset about it. So, those 2 places in West Virginia actually surprised me a bit. And once again, the nature, the mountains and stuff, it wasn't so bad.
I think that those are both 2 good destinations, and they wouldn't have been anybody's top market, which I think speaks to the unique nature of what you're doing in Mobilads. Jackson Hole is not New York. Morganton, West Virginia is not LA. Like these are markets that don't come up on the top 20 DMAs on anybody's list. I want to share some of the cool stuff that you're working on. Some things that I didn't even catch about your website. Which like this little feature I thought was cool. This is a question that we get a lot, is like, you know, hey, what sort of impact will a certain number of cars have, or, you know, a certain number of billboards? What I love about your little calculator here is that you could just play with this, change the number of cars that you want to have in a campaign and the duration of that campaign. And an advertiser can kind of estimate what it might look like and choose from some different markets. And this is just functionality built in to your website. Have you found like the transparency of your process? Has that helped facilitate, deal flow for you? Is it just something that's kind of nice to have? You like to have it on the website? It's cool to show people. Like, you've thought about the technology and the tools and transparency around buying your platform. Like, how does that ultimately translate in outcomes for you?
Yes, yeah, for sure. So it really, this goes back to the whole kind of taxi cab comparison. So when we started reaching out to clients or brands that were doing taxi top advertising, we started asking them why they did it. And for the most part, the answers we got, we just didn't, maybe they didn't make sense to us. Like they basically just said, well, we've always done taxi tops. Nothing against taxi tops, right? Great format.
Sure.
It's just,
love taxi tops.
If you want to do them, I would expect someone to kind of prove that, you're getting some results, right? And it hasn't always been the case where that's provided. So we clearly said, look, if we're gonna convince these folks to switch from taxi tops to rideshare, it can't just be like, maybe our format's a bit larger, or we're using Uber versus taxi. If that's the affiliation you want, let's prove that it works. Let's show them where these cars drive. Let's show them that they're going to get, airport coverage plus Manhattan coverage plus Brooklyn coverage, or wherever they want, right? There's also drivers that tend to hang out in areas more so than others, right? So there's drivers that will kind of try and focus in like the Bronx or something, right? So maybe that's good for the Yankees or for someone else. And so we quickly, dove pretty heavy into the data. And so our idea was always to track every car where it is when it's on the road, and come up with an impressions, a way of generating impressions that we thought made sense, was in line with kind of previous formats, and then really track it down individually to the car. So we're not looking at street level data, how many people pass through this place at a given time. We're actually matching individual cars to individual people by utilizing their cell phones.
Yeah, this is
it's
incredible.
It's all anonymized data, of course, right? We don't know who these people are, but we know that we kind of know, we know where they are, when they're there, and we know some demographic data based on where they live. Once again, no names, no addresses, none of that, but we know generically, rolling up into a large bucket, who they are, what they sometimes like to do, where they spend their time. And so we started providing this for all of our clients. This was actually a report for Amazon, who we did 4 campaigns for, I guess in 2019.
And if you're listening on the audio version, check the show notes for the YouTube link, and you'll be able to see all this. We're looking at some of the mobile ads reporting suite here. And this is abundant stuff, man. Like, I've never seen anything like this. Maybe just in general, like, I think that one screen, we do a pretty good job of reporting. This is really good stuff. It's deep. It's great audience insight. It's like, there's feedback that as a marketer you can actually use in terms of impression delivery and engagement and clicks on retargeting. And this is really good stuff. And this campaign was for Amazon. Talk about this campaign.
Yeah, for sure. So this was a campaign for Amazon treasure trucks. So these are they're essentially mobile retail fronts that offer last minute inventory at a pretty heavy discount. I think they're all 4-star and above items. They essentially we're getting folks to come pick up items instead of ordering them online.
Okay.
And so they put these treasure trucks all across the city, depending on the city. I think New York has like 2 or 3 of them. Probably that's like a permitting issue or something. They can't just park on the street. But in Atlanta, they think they had like 10 or 12 of them. And so what we did was our first step in attribution is figuring out which cell phone IDs are within 15 meters. Our CTO is from Canada, so
look, that's 45 feet or so.
Yeah, we'll call it 15 yards. Same thing. Figuring out what cell phones were within the circle or that radius of that vehicle, and then what we can do from then is we can watch them for the next, depending on your attribution window, we can watch them for the next 5, 10, 14 days, and figure out if that same cell phone pings at a treasure truck. And so what we do is we do, as most do, we create a a case study where we're looking at phones that were exposed to cars versus phones that were not. And then you looked at the difference in visits for that random controlled audience versus the ones that were exposed or potentially exposed, we call it. And you'll see that the visits are much higher for folks that have come in contact with a car. And they're also much higher for folks that come in contact with a car more than once. So if you come in contact with a car 5 times, it's way more likely they're going to show up than one that sees a car once. And goes along with the theory of it.
As a marketer, just to have that directional feedback that, hey, something different is happening when an audience is exposed to a vehicle versus when they're not exposed to a vehicle. Hey, something even different than that is happening when someone's exposed to a vehicle multiple times or potentially multiple vehicles over a period of time. And right, like fundamentally as marketers, those things make sense, but being able to show it to an advertiser is something that traditionally out of home, we haven't been able to do that, as deterministically as maybe we would have liked to, or as complete a picture as what you've got here. How have advertisers responded to that? Is this something that has been valuable in retention and growing accounts for you? Like how has the analytics been received?
Yeah, so for the most part, it's been received very well. So there's always some clients that they don't care as much. They're more interested in the POPs, what the cars look like. They've traditionally not tracked this kind of stuff, right? They don't expect it from us, and therefore we don't get into it much. Amazon was one of those ones that did care a lot. So we actually, the reason why we had this HTML report is because we can customize it pretty easily, and they wanted to see things like what is the native language of the person who saw. They were seeing huge differences in impact in Houston versus Atlanta. And their theory was that there's a lot of native Spanish speakers in Houston that didn't understand the ad. And so we're able to get that granular. So wow. They actually saw that in Houston, in both cities, that the data that we were saying, so the highest visited treasure truck was in line with the data that they saw. Right. So we didn't actually get any data from them, like visits information, stuff like that. They keep a pretty tight grip on it. But basically what we were reporting to them saying this treasure truck's the most visited, this is the second, this is the third, they kind of saw the same thing. And so they trusted our analysis. And so what they ended up doing was they launched 3 more campaigns with us that same year, I think a month or 2 later. And they came to us, I think, with 6 markets, and they told us to choose 3 based on density, based on our driver base, based on, language ability, stuff like that. And so we actually guided them to, it was Charlotte and Columbus and one other. But basically, they took our recommendation and did the cities that we said. And we saw the same thing. We did the same report, saw good results from the visits. And actually, we took it one step further because they also did digital retargeting. So the way that we collect device IDs, we can also utilize those device IDs to target digitally, right? So we did display ads and did a control study against those as well. So click-throughs of a generic search audience, someone who just types in Amazon treasure truck versus the audience that was exposed, and we're able to retarget those people same way. And I think in the report, it shows there's like a 2.5 or 2.7 times higher click-through rate for the folks that basically the IDs that we delivered to them versus the generic search. So that was another one when, we were still young. And I think because attribution has always been somewhat lacking, obviously it's growing like crazy right now. Everyone's requiring it. But back then, even us were kind of like, do the ads work? And for the first time, we always thought, right? I always noticed them, but I'm biased because I look for these ads. I'm looking for new clients. I'm looking for billboards and stuff, right? But do other folks notice these things? Does it work? Does it drive stuff? And I think that was the first time we did a full analysis with a big enough sample size, enough cars, enough IDs that showed us that it did. And so that was like, up until that point, I think we believed it. But after that, we were way more sure. And that gave us the confidence to kind of, pitch the product and continue to grow out the data side of things.
It's awesome. It's incredible to see the growth, and in such a short period of time, not funded, bootstrapped and boots on the ground. And I'm sure that you've had to replace a few pairs of boots since then. You've got a bunch of other tools that folks can access pretty simply on the site. I love this planning tool to be able to select by market, change your number of cars. This is the coolest, to be able to set in. This is just like building a Facebook ad campaign, except for wrapped cars. What are the ages, gender? We can get down into some additional targeting. I think that what you're building is really amazing. Your speed to market, I think, is something that a lot of folks are going to continue to be interested in as digital dollars shift to out of home. That speed to market's going to be especially critical. And kudos to you for figuring it out so early on in the game. The analytics, the tools for advertisers. I think that you're just doing a great job there. Folks want to learn more about mobile ads. Where do they get in touch with you? What's the website? Give them the Latin long. How do folks find you?
Yeah, so it's mobilads.co, no E in mobilads, not .com. We get that a lot. Mobilads.co, and my email is craig@mobilads.co. That's the best way to get a hold of us.
Cool. We'll make sure to put all that in the show notes and the description below. So if you want to get in touch with Craig and his team, or check out just more about what mobile ads do, definitely give them a look. And Craig, it's been awesome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Absolutely. If you found it to be helpful, please share it with somebody who could benefit. As always, make sure to smash that subscribe button down there in the corner. If you're listening to this in audio version, please give it a follow wherever you're listening to. And we'll see y'all next time.
Quarter century, I finally came to my senses. I finally got my hand up on the tinted Benz, kid. I see the world clear through my tinted lenses. With the dream and the drive, the possibilities endless. Now print that, send this all the way to Tokyo. Take a trip down south, down to Mexico. Next stop, Shanghai, the world-class trade show. First class all the way, cause that's how we roll. Yeah, call us the rock star businessman. Rockin' shows, we handle business, man. We got our own future in the palm of our hands, cause divided we fall.